Welcome to Sweet Dreams Storytelling, where we unwind, relax, and drift into dreamland. I'm your host, Mike, and I'm so glad you're joining me tonight. Let's get cozy and settle in. Story for this evening is our adaptation of a beautiful novel by Sewell, Black Beauty. Chapter 1, A Gentle Beginning. The first place I can remember was a large meadow filled with lush green grass and bright wild flowers that danced in the wind. It was surrounded by tall hedges and scattered trees, their leaves whispering in the breeze. There was a small brook that trickled through the pasture, cool and clean, where I often drank and splashed on warm days. The sun shone brightly, and the earth was soft beneath my hooves. It was a world of peace, and in those early days I knew nothing of fear, cruelty, or hardship. I lived there with my mother Duchess, a beautiful, strong, and wise mare. She was well respected among the other horses, not only because of her proud bearing and graceful trot, but because of her gentle ways and calm temperament. She often told me, "Do your best, and always be gentle and good, for no creature wins anything lasting by force." She taught me how to run with purpose, how to listen and learn, and how to understand people, not only their words but their voices, their touch, and even their silences. Her stories shaped my first understanding of the world, and I held to her wisdom for the rest of my life. There were other colts and fillies in the field with us, and we often played together, running as fast as the wind, rearing and prancing, learning our own strength. But I was careful, for my mother had warned me not to be rough or wild. "You come from a good line, Blackie," she said to me one day, calling me by the name I had before I became Black Beauty. "Your father was well-bred and strong, known for his courage and his gentle nature. Never shame his name or forget what you are." Though I was young, I took pride in these words. I began to feel the strength in my legs, the rhythm of the gallop, and the joy of simply being alive. But even in those innocent days, I started to see that not all horses were as lucky as I was. The colts who came from harsher places were sometimes fearful, flinching at loud noises or running from a raised hand. One such colt, a small, nervous bay, had come from a nearby farm where the farmer was quick with the whip. He hardly played with us, and he always seemed tired. My mother told me, "There are good men and cruel men, and a horse must learn to tell the difference. But never let cruelty make you bitter. Stay true to your nature." Our master was a good man. Farmer Gray was not rich, but he was kind and fair. He believed that a horse should be trained with patience, not fear. He would come into the field with a bucket of oats or slices of carrot, calling us with a whistle. We came to him gladly, not because we feared punishment, but because we trusted him. He would stroke my neck and say, "This colt's got promise. See the shine in his coat, the steady look in his eye." Those moments stayed with me. A gentle touch, a kind word. They meant more to me than the sharpest command. In those early days, life seemed as if it would always be full of sunshine, soft grass, and kind hands. I did not yet know the sting of a whip, the strain of a heavy load, or the despair of being overworked. But I did know love, and freedom, and care, and that knowledge, I believe, helped carry me through all the dark days that came later. Looking back now, through the lens of many years and many trials, I see how important those first lessons were. They shaped not only my body but my heart, and though I have known pain, I have never forgotten that beginning. I was born into kindness, and that, I think, is the best beginning any creature can ask for. Chapter 2, Leaving the Meadow. It was early spring when everything began to change. The air smelled different, brisk and sharp with the promise of new growth. The days grew longer, the grass thicker and richer, and birds returned to the hedgerows, filling the mornings with song. But in the midst of all that beauty, there came a restlessness I couldn't name. Something was stirring, not just in the earth, but in the humans who cared for us. One afternoon, Farmer Gray came to the meadow with a halter in his hand. He whistled softly, and I, as always, trotted over to him. By then I was nearly 4 years old. I had grown tall and strong, with a glossy black coat and well-formed legs. The farmer ran his hand along my neck and said to himself, "Yes, he's ready." Ready for what? I didn't know, but I trusted him. That very evening, I was led out of the meadow and into the stable yard. It was my first time leaving the pasture, and my heart beat fast with excitement and confusion. I looked back once, hearing the distant whinny of my mother. She stood at the gate, watching me. Her eyes were calm, but there was a sadness there too. She knew what was coming. Inside the stable, the world felt different, quieter, dimmer, and filled with smells I didn't recognize. The groom, James Howard, was a young man with a steady hand and a kind voice. He rubbed me down, gave me a small measure of oats, and spoke softly as he led me into a box stall. "Don't worry, lad," he said. "You're in good hands here." That night, I didn't sleep well. I missed the open sky, the feel of the wind through my mane, the rustle of grass under my hooves. Everything was too still, too close. But in the morning, James returned and began the next phase of my life, breaking me in. Breaking in, as I learned, did not mean what the word sounds like. It was not cruel, not in this place, not under the hand of Farmer Gray. I was not whipped, nor frightened, nor forced. James took his time. First he placed a soft bridle over my head, letting me wear it while I stood in the stall. Then came the saddle, light at first, then heavier with each day, always with calm reassurance. The first time I was backed, I felt something strange and heavy on my back. A man. It startled me, and I gave a little leap, but James sat steady and quiet. "There now," he said, "nothing to fear." Day by day, I grew used to his weight, the sound of his voice, the feel of the reins. I learned to walk, trot, and canter under command. I learned to stop at a word, to turn gently, to move with balance and obedience. James never struck me, he never shouted. I learned through trust. Alongside this, I was taught to bear the collar and harness. I was introduced to the cart, at first empty, then slowly loaded. It was tiring work, but never cruel, and in those days, I began to feel a sense of pride in what I was learning. I wasn't just a colt anymore, I was becoming a horse of purpose, a partner in labor. During my training, I still caught glimpses of the meadow and the others. Sometimes, on clear evenings, I heard the call of the other colts or the low nicker of my mother in the distance. It ached in my chest, but I knew this was the way of things. And then, one bright morning, something new happened. Farmer Gray led me out, polished and shining, to meet a well-dressed gentleman and a kind-faced lady. The man examined me carefully, looking at my teeth, running his hand down my legs, observing my trot. "He's a fine young horse," he said. "Strong, intelligent, good manners. I believe he'll do very well." That afternoon, I was loaded into a horse box, the first time I had ever been shut into something that moved. The wheels rumbled under me, and I had no idea where I was going. When we stopped and the door opened, I stepped into a new world. Large trees, gravel paths, flower beds, and a grand house in the distance. This was Birtwick Park. There were new faces, new voices, and other horses nearby. I felt nervous, uncertain, but also curious. My world had changed, and I had left the meadow behind, but I had been prepared well, and the memory of my mother's voice still echoed in my mind. "Do your best, and always be gentle and good." Chapter 3. New Friends. My first few days at Birtwick Park were filled with curiosity and a quiet sense of wonder. Everything was new, the long cobbled drive shaded by elms, the gentle clip-clop of hooves echoing through the stable courtyard, and the sweet smell of hay mingled with polished leather and saddle soap. It was all strange, yet not unpleasant. The stables were grander than I had known before, clean, orderly, and full of quiet activity. Each stall was spacious and bedded deep with straw. The walls gleamed with a fresh coat of whitewash, and the harnesses hung neatly in rows. The grooms moved about efficiently, but there was none of the shouting or slapping I had heard of in other places. I was placed in a stall beside 2 other horses. As I settled in, the sound of a cheerful neigh came from the next stall on my left. I turned my head to see a short, round pony with a dappled grey coat and twinkling eyes. "Well, hello there," he said in a friendly voice. "You must be the new arrival. Welcome to Birtwick." I blinked in surprise. He was smaller than me by far, but carried himself with confidence. "My name's Merrylegs," he continued. "I've been here for years. I take care of the children, Master Gordon's young ones. They ride me in the paddock and give me apples and sugar lumps. A pleasant life, really. And you?" I don't have a name yet," I replied. "At the farm they called me Blackie." "Well, you've got the look of a fine young gentleman," Merrylegs said, tossing his mane. "You'll do nicely here. The squire is kind, and so is John, our head groom. No whips, no cruelty. Just do your job well and behave, and you'll be happy." I felt a sense of relief at his words. Just then, a loud snort came from the stall to my right. I turned to see a tall, strong mare with a rich chestnut coat and a striking white blaze down her face. But her ears were back and her eyes sharp. She watched me warily. "Don't get too comfortable," she said, her voice hard. "Not every place stays kind forever." "That's Ginger," Merrylegs whispered. She's had a hard life. Been passed from hand to hand before she came here. Doesn't trust easily." I nodded, unsure of what to say. "You look too soft," Ginger went on, her tone less hostile but still guarded. "Let me give you some advice, Colt. Not all humans are gentle like they are here. Some will break you before they ever try to understand you. Don't let your guard down." I didn't answer right away. I had never heard a horse speak that way before. Her eyes held a mixture of pain and pride, and though her words were sharp, I sensed they came from experience, not malice. Later that day, I was taken out for grooming by John Manley, the head groom. He was a tall man with kind eyes and steady hands. His movements were careful, respectful. As he brushed my coat and picked out my hooves, he spoke softly. "You're a fine one, aren't you?" he said. "Strong legs, gentle eyes. We'll call you Black Beauty, I think. Suits you." Black Beauty. The name settled over me like a warm blanket. It felt right, like it belonged to the horse I was becoming, not the colt I had been. I would carry it with pride. That evening, after feeding and grooming, I stood quietly in my stall, thinking about the day. The stable was peaceful now, lit only by the flicker of lanterns and the soft rustle of straw. Merrylegs leaned his head over the partition. "Don't let Ginger scare you off," he said kindly. "She's had a rough past, but there's no better mare in a tight spot, I tell you, brave as they come." "I believe you," I said. "She seems strong." "Oh, she is," Merrylegs replied. "She just needs time and kindness." I looked over toward her stall. Ginger stood with her head lowered, her ears relaxed now, eyes closed, a picture of strength wrapped in sorrow. I hoped she would come to trust me one day. As I settled into the straw and closed my eyes, I felt something I hadn't felt since leaving the meadow: comfort. The world was bigger now, more complicated, but I wasn't alone. I had a name, I had a place, and perhaps I had friends. Chapter 4: Lessons in the Rains. Life at Birtwick Park quickly settled into a comfortable rhythm. The sun would rise over the red brick house, lighting the dew-covered fields beyond, and the stable yard would come to life. Horses were fed, stalls mucked out, harnesses polished, and the soft murmur of voices filled the air like birdsong. For me, these peaceful days were filled with learning. Though I had already been broken in at Farmer Gray's, there was still much to master at Birtwick. Here, every movement, every response mattered. I was no longer a farm colt. I was being shaped into a fine carriage horse, a creature of both strength and elegance. My training was overseen by John Manley, the head groom. He was the sort of man horses trusted instinctively, quiet, firm, and fair. He never struck without cause, never raised his voice without need. When he worked with me, his hands were steady and his voice low, but there was no mistaking his authority. He expected obedience, but he earned it, never demanded it with cruelty. Each day, I was fitted with a different piece of tack: snaffle bridles, cavessons, martingales, and eventually the dreaded bearing rein. That was the hardest lesson of all. The bearing rein, as I learned, was a short strap attached to the bridle and harness, forcing a horse to hold its head up unnaturally high. It was considered fashionable in the city, a mark of elegance and discipline. But to us horses, it was a torment. I remember the first time it was tightened on me. My neck, naturally arched and strong, was pulled upward so sharply that I could barely see the ground. My windpipe felt compressed, and every step jarred my spine. "Easy, boy," John said, noticing my discomfort. He quickly loosened the rein and sighed. "I don't care what the London folks think. It's a cruel thing, that contraption." He left it loosely adjusted, just enough to satisfy appearances without causing me pain. I was grateful for that. Not all horses were so fortunate. Ginger had not been so lucky in her past. One afternoon, as the three of us stood in the yard after grooming, I ventured a question. "Ginger," I asked gently, "what was it like before Birtwick?" She looked at me sharply at first, then relaxed. "Hard," she said, "unforgiving. I was broken in with a bearing rein pulled tight as iron, and hands that knew nothing of patience. I was kicked, whipped, yanked, until I fought back. Then they beat me harder." She turned away, her voice low. I learned quickly: give in, or be broken. Merrylegs snorted. "It's not right, but it happens more often than not." John emerged from the tack room then, leading a saddle over his arm. "Beauty, you're coming out for a drive with the mistress this afternoon," he said. "Let's see how you do on the road." It was my first time being hitched to a light two-wheeled carriage. I stood still as the traces were secured and the polished harness fitted snugly. When the lady of the house, Mrs. Gordon, stepped into the cart with her maid, I caught the scent of lavender and soap. She patted my neck lightly. "What a handsome creature," she said with a smile. "John, he looks like he was born to wear a harness." "Indeed he was, ma'am," John replied. "But bred for more than just looks. He's got sense too." With a gentle flick of the reins and a quiet walk on, we began. At first, every sound startled me: the rumble of distant wheels, the bark of a dog, the flapping of a bird's wings. But John's calm voice paired with Mrs. Gordon's gentle handling helped me focus. I learned quickly to respond to the lightest tug of the rein, to stop at command, and to hold my pace steadily, even when others galloped past. We drove past blooming hedgerows and over wooden bridges. I felt the breeze in my mane and the harness shifting with my movement. It wasn't the freedom of the meadow, but it was purpose. And somehow, that felt good. As we returned to the stable, John gave me an approving nod. "You'll be the pride of the stables, lad, if you keep that up." That night, as I stood in my stall munching on oats, I thought about what it meant to serve. It was a word I had never considered before, but now it lived in my bones. To serve with pride, to serve with dignity. That was what John gave us. Not just work, but meaning, and that made all the difference. Chapter 5. A Hero's Instinct. By the time autumn arrived at Birtwick Park, I had grown fully accustomed to my new life. The air had grown cooler, the leaves golden and crisp, and the long summer days were giving way to brisk mornings and early sunsets. I was now a trusted carriage horse for Squire Gordon and his wife, regularly pulling the phaeton or riding out under saddle with John Manley. Each day taught me something new, not only about the duties of a horse, but about people and the strange, complicated world we lived in together. The squire was a just and noble man. He spoke firmly but kindly, and he never allowed cruelty in his stables. The horses respected him instinctively. His wife, Mrs. Gordon, was gentle, soft-spoken, and often ill, but she treated us with kindness and affection, often speaking to us as though we understood every word. And truth be told, I believe we did, at least the feelings behind them. One night in late November, a call came for the squire to travel urgently across the countryside. A close friend, whose wife had taken dangerously ill, had sent word asking the squire to come and advise on arrangements. Without hesitation, he prepared to leave. The journey would take several hours and require travel across rough, unfamiliar roads. "John," he said as he buttoned his overcoat, "I'll take Black Beauty tonight. He's the surest on his feet, and he has strength to spare." "Yes, sir," John replied, already moving toward my stall. "He'll get you there and back safely, if any horse can." I felt a thrill of pride at their confidence in me. Within minutes, I was groomed, saddled, and ready at the front of the stable. The night was cold, and the wind moaned faintly through the trees. Dark clouds hovered above, and a faint drizzle had begun to fall. "Easy, boy," John said as he patted my neck. "Mind your feet on the wet roads. Bring the squire home safe." The squire mounted, and we set off down the long drive. The rain began to fall in earnest, and soon the path ahead was nothing more than a slick ribbon of mud and shadow. But I was alert, my hooves steady even on the slippery ground. We reached the village of Chestnut Hill just past 10 o'clock. The squire entered the house of his friend while I waited patiently in the stable yard, sheltered under a lean-to. I could hear the murmur of voices inside, low, urgent tones and occasional footsteps moving quickly. Something was clearly wrong. After an hour or so, the squire returned, his face tired and somber. He mounted without a word, and we began the long journey home. The rain had stopped, but a sharp wind cut through the trees, and mist drifted low across the road like ribbons of silver. Halfway through the wood, we reached the old stone bridge that crossed a narrow stream. I had passed it before during daylight, but now, in the darkness, something felt wrong. As we approached, I slowed, my ears pricked forward. "Go on, boy," the squire urged gently, pressing me forward with his heels. But I stood still, every instinct inside me screaming that something was wrong. I sniffed the air. There was water, yes, but too close. I shifted my weight and took a step to the side. "Come now, Black Beauty," the squire said, more firmly. Still, I did not move forward. And then came the sound, a low groan, not from any animal, but from the bridge itself. A moment later, part of the stone structure ahead crumbled and gave way with a splash and a terrible cracking sound. The center of the bridge had collapsed. The squire gasped and quickly dismounted, leading me back several paces. "Good heavens," he whispered, looking at the spot where we would have crossed. "You've saved us, Beauty. If you had gone on..." He didn't finish the sentence. He just stood there for a long moment, one hand resting on my neck, the other gripping the reins loosely. His breath misted in the air, and his eyes were wide with shock and gratitude. When we finally turned back, he took a different road through the hills, adding nearly an hour to our journey. It was steep and difficult, but I didn't falter. His hand rested gently on my neck the entire way, as if to say, "I trust you." We arrived at Birtwick near dawn. John was waiting with a lantern, his face pale with worry. "You're safe," he exclaimed, helping the squire down. Thank heaven. Thanks to this horse, the squire said. If not for his good sense and sure feet, I might not be standing here. The bridge was out, collapsed right in front of us. John turned to me, eyes wide, and gave a low whistle. Smart lad, he said, rubbing my face. A true gentleman. That morning, as I stood in my stall munching my feed, I felt not tired but proud. I had been afraid, but I had trusted my instinct, and it had saved a life. I didn't know then that this would be just one of many moments where quick thinking, training, and trust would be tested. But that night, I had proven myself. Not just a carriage horse, not just a well-groomed beauty, a protector, a partner, a hero. Chapter 6. Farewell to Birtwick. Time passed gently at Birtwick Park. Seasons changed, and with them, the rhythms of our lives. In the spring, the fields bloomed. In summer, we worked under bright skies and soft winds. Autumn brought the rich smell of falling leaves, and in winter, the crisp silence of frost-covered mornings. It was, in every way, a good life, full of purpose, kindness, and peace. The stable had become more than a home to me. It was a place of safety, a place where I was respected. John Manley remained as steady as ever, and young Joe Green, the stable boy, had grown into his duties. Though he was still learning, he had a warm heart and always did his best. Merrylegs remained cheerful, wise, and affectionate, and even Ginger, though still sharp at times, seemed to find a measure of calm here. We were a family, and I had begun to think that things might always be this way. But life, as I would learn again and again, does not stand still. It began with a soft cough, then another, and then, over days and weeks, Mrs. Gordon's strength began to fade. The doctor came often, and the house grew quieter, the voices more hushed. Sometimes we would see her being helped into the carriage, her face pale and tired, her once bright eyes dulled by illness. One evening, John stood beside my stall longer than usual. He rubbed my neck absently, his brow furrowed. "They're going abroad," he said finally. More to himself than to me. "The doctors say she needs warmer air. The squires decided, Spain or the south of France, somewhere sunny, for her lungs." I didn't understand all the words, but I understood the feeling. Something was ending. In the following weeks, preparations were made. Luggage was packed, furniture covered, and servants dismissed or reassigned. The whole house took on the heavy stillness of change. One morning, John and Joe came into the stable and stood before me and Ginger. Merrylegs, being too small to pull a carriage for long distances, had already been promised to the vicar's children. "You too," John said softly, "will be sold." Ginger lifted her head sharply, ears flicking back. I felt a strange tightness in my chest, though I didn't fully grasp what it meant. "It's not the squire's wish," John continued. "If it were up to him, he'd keep you forever, but he can't take you abroad, and he won't leave you idle or in strange hands. So he's asked me to find you good homes, and I will. That's a promise." A few days later, a man arrived to see us. He examined our legs and teeth, asked questions about our temperaments and training. I tried to stand as proudly as I could, remembering how Farmer Gray had once spoken to me in the meadow. "Never forget what you are." "He's a handsome fellow," the man said, running a hand along my side. "Well-mannered. I'll take him." John nodded, but said nothing. Ginger was sold to another gentleman the next day. We didn't get a chance to say goodbye properly, just a quiet glance across the stable yard before she was led away. Her eyes were unreadable, but I sensed her sorrow. The morning I was to leave, the stable was unusually quiet. Merrylegs stood watching from his stall, his eyes sad. "So," he said softly, "off you go. I suppose we always knew it couldn't last forever, but still, I hoped." "Take care of them," I said. "Joe, John, everyone." He nodded. "And you. Keep your head high. Remember what you've been taught." John came to lead me out. He brushed me until my coat gleamed, then placed a final pat on my shoulder. "You've been the best horse I've ever worked with," he said. "I hope your next master has the sense to treat you right." Then he did something he had never done before. He kissed my forehead. "Goodbye, beauty." I was led away past the stone fountain and the tall hedges, out through the wrought iron gates. I looked back once. The house stood still in the morning mist. The windows glinted like glass eyes, watching, and then it was gone behind me. That day marked the end of everything I had known. The kindness of Birtwick, the comfort of friends, the steady hands of John, the soft voice of Mrs. Gordon. I did not know where I was going or what awaited me, only that I would no longer be where my story began. But even as the road stretched before me, unknown and silent, I carried something with me, the lessons I had learned, the kindness I had known, and the promise I had made to myself. to be gentle, to be brave, to endure. Chapter 7. The Bearing Rhine. My next home was a grand estate called Earlshall Park, a place of beauty and elegance, where everything from the polished doorknobs to the flower beds was immaculate and refined. The grounds were vast, the house itself a great stone manor, surrounded by well-kept lawns and tall iron gates. Everything was order and perfection, at least from the outside. I was led into a stable as fine as any I had seen, spacious stalls, gleaming brass and grooms dressed in neat uniforms. The head groom was a tall man named York. He had a gruff voice and stiff manner, but he knew his work and handled horses with competent hands. I sensed that he respected us as animals to be cared for, but not necessarily as beings with feelings or personalities. He didn't speak kindly, but he didn't strike unnecessarily either. To him, duty came first. Not long after my arrival, I saw a familiar face across the stable aisle. Ginger. She was thinner than I remembered, and the spark in her eyes seemed dimmed. When I called softly, she turned her head and nodded once. That alone told me everything I needed to know. She was surviving, but not thriving. "There you are," she said quietly, when York left the stable. "Welcome to the show."
What do you mean?
I asked. "You'll see soon enough," she replied. "Everything here is for appearances. We're not animals, we're ornaments." I didn't fully understand what she meant. Not until the next morning, when I was groomed, polished, and harnessed for the first time at Earlshall. The tack was rich and well made, the carriage gleaming with fresh paint. But as York tightened the straps, I noticed something strange. A short rein connecting the bit in my mouth to a hook above the saddle. When he adjusted it, I felt my head being pulled upward, high, stiff, and unnatural. He stepped back to admire the effect.
"There we are," he said. "Nothing finer than a high head and proud neck. The mistress will be pleased."
I tried to lower my head to relax my neck, but the strap pulled back sharply. My windpipe felt constricted. The pressure made it difficult to move freely, to see the ground ahead. My neck began to ache within minutes. Ginger was already harnessed beside me, her head held high by the same cruel strap. Her eyes met mine and I could see the pain in them. "It's the bearing rein," she said, "and we're stuck with it." "But why?" I asked, gasping lightly. "It hurts." "Because it looks fashionable," she said bitterly. "Because the ladies and gentlemen like to see horses with their heads up like statues. Never mind that it's torture." And it was. The first few times we were driven out with the bearing rein tightly fastened, my neck burned by the end of the ride. My muscles ached, my jaw was sore from the constant pressure of the bit, and the strain on my back made even standing painful. It was not the kind of work I had been trained for, not purposeful movement, not steady pulling. It was performance, pure and simple. When we returned from our first outing, York loosened the bearing rein and patted my flank as if I'd done something admirable. "Well done," he muttered. "Didn't shy once. The mistress likes her horses proud." But it wasn't pride I felt. It was weariness. Later, in the quiet of the stable, Ginger spoke again. "You'll get used to it," she said. "Or at least you'll stop fighting it. That's how it works here. They don't want strong minds. They want statues that move." "Does it ever get better?" I asked. She looked away. "Sometimes they loosen it, if they think we're becoming lame. But mostly, it's tight until we break, or they send us away." That night, I couldn't sleep. I thought of Birtwick, of John Manley's hands, of Mrs. Gordon's gentle voice. I remembered the open pastures, and the feeling of trotting freely, head held high on my own, not forced. Now I understood what Ginger meant about losing your spirit. If I hadn't had those good years, those kind years, I might have broken too. Not all horses were so lucky. In the days that followed, I tried my best. I learned to move with the rein, to carry myself with forced elegance. I didn't resist, not because I accepted it, but because I knew that resisting would only bring punishment or worse, pain. Ginger, however, was less compliant. I saw her eyes flash with anger on several occasions, and once she even reared while being harnessed. "She's a troublesome mare," York muttered. "I don't like it, but the mistress insists on keeping her." "She's spirited," one of the younger grooms replied. "She's desperate," I thought. And I knew then what Ginger had known all along. Beauty without kindness is a terrible thing. To be admired while suffering is no comfort. And the praise of those who do not understand the cost is worse than silence. Chapter 8. A Tragic Fall. Life at Earlshall Park was a strange mix of grandeur and discomfort. The stables gleamed with polish and order. The carriages were works of art, and the livery worn by the grooms was spotless. But underneath the glitter, a quiet pain simmered, especially for those of us who pulled the weight of that elegance day after day. Ginger and I continued to serve as the mistress's carriage horses. Outwardly, we made a striking pair. her chestnut coat glowing like burnished copper, my black coat shining like onyx. But looks deceive. The bearing rein pulled our heads back day after day, stiffening our necks and wearing us down. The soreness in our muscles became constant, and though we never spoke of it while being harnessed, I could feel Ginger's pain reflected in my own. One day, everything changed. It was early afternoon in late spring. The mistress had a luncheon party, and York, the head groom, was away attending to estate matters. In his absence, the young groom, Reuben Smith, was in charge. Reuben had been hired recently. He was capable, generally gentle with the horses, and quite skilled with his hands. But there was one flaw that followed him like a shadow: drink. We had all heard whispers in the stable, quiet conversations between the grooms when they thought no one was listening. Reuben was known to overindulge. On his best days, he was excellent. On his worst, he was dangerous. That afternoon, Reuben was ordered to drive me to town with a light cart to fetch a new set of shoes from the blacksmith and pick up supplies from the ironmonger. I felt uneasy the moment we left the yard. Reuben's hands were not as steady on the reins as York's. His posture slouched, and I could smell the faint sour scent of ale on his breath. Still, I obeyed. I had been trained to trust my driver, and so I did. The journey into town was uneventful. At the blacksmith's, I was left tied outside while the new shoes were purchased. I stood patiently, watching the people pass. Women in fine dresses, children skipping along the cobbled street, dogs barking at carts. Eventually, Reuben returned and loaded the goods. But something had changed. His speech was louder, his movements looser. As he climbed onto the cart, he nearly stumbled, cursing under his breath. I knew then, with growing dread, that he had been drinking more. The return road was rougher than the one we had taken into town, unpaved in places, winding with loose stones and patches of soft earth from a recent rain. The reins jerked clumsily in Reuben's hands as he laughed at nothing and urged me to go faster. "Come on, beauty," he slurred. "Let's see a bit of fire." I hesitated. "Faster," I said, he shouted, flicking the reins hard. Despite my misgivings, I obeyed. The cart lurched forward as I broke into a trot. The harness shifted behind me, straining against the load. Reuben kept shouting and laughing, leaning to one side, barely balancing. Then it happened. As we rounded a bend, one of the wheels struck a loose stone. The jolt unseated Reuben, who yanked the reins violently in surprise. I lost my balance for a split second. My hoof struck a hidden rut in the road, and before I could catch myself, my leg twisted violently. The pain was sharp and sudden, shooting up my leg like fire. I stumbled, fell to my knees, and crashed forward onto the ground. The cart tipped sideways, and Reuben was thrown clear, landing hard against the base of a tree. The world swam in pain. I tried to rise, but my front leg gave way beneath me. Everything throbbed with agony. Somewhere in the distance, I heard voices shouting, hurried footsteps, a woman's scream. People came running from nearby cottages. I lay still, trembling, unable to stand. Reuben did not move. Later, a doctor would say that Reuben had broken his neck and died instantly. He never spoke another word. And though he had been reckless, foolish, and careless, it still hurt me to know he was gone. I was eventually helped to my feet by strangers. My leg, though not broken, was badly strained and swollen. I could not walk properly, let alone pull a cart. When I was led back to Earlshall Park later that night, limping, sore, and exhausted, the mistress looked at me with a kind of cold disapproval. "A lame horse is no use to me," she said. "He'll have to go." I understood, in that instant, how fragile a horse's place could be. No matter how loyal or obedient, no matter how many miles we had carried them or how many burdens we had borne, one accident, one mistake, one human error, and we were cast aside. John Manley once said, "A horse is only as good as the hands that guide him." He was right. And now, I was injured, unwanted, and about to be sold again. Chapter 9. From Luxury to Labor. After my fall, my leg took weeks to heal. Though it was not broken, the strain had been deep, and I could barely put weight on it for many days. During that time, I was kept in a quiet paddock, away from the bustle of Earlshall Park. I had shelter, food, and space to rest, but I sensed the silence around me was not peace, it was decision. Ginger was not brought to visit me. Merrylegs was far away. The groom York came to see me occasionally, checking my leg and giving me short, blunt updates. "They're trying to sell you," he said one afternoon, rubbing his chin. "The lady wants you gone, says you're damaged goods, but the squire's put in a word for a good sale, someone who will treat you fair." I wanted to believe him. Eventually, a man named Mr. Barry arrived to examine me. He was a middle-aged gentleman with a thin face and cautious eyes. His groom, a rough-looking fellow named Filcher, tested my gait in the yard. Though I still limped slightly, I did my best to walk with dignity. "Not bad," Mr. Barry muttered. "Still young. He'll do for lighter work." And with that, my fate was sealed. I was sold. Gone were the polished carriages, the manicured lawns, and the fine silks of Earlshall. In their place was the clatter of cobblestones, the smell of smoke and sewage, and the constant press of human voices and wheels. I had come to the city. Mr. Barry lived in a modest townhouse in a quiet London neighbourhood. He kept just one carriage, a light four-wheeled Bromham, and a single groom to care for me and the equipment. That groom was Filcher, and it did not take long to see that his care for horses extended only as far as appearances required. At first, I hoped for kindness, but Filcher was impatient and sloppy. He rarely brushed me properly, and my stable was often left untidy. If I neighed for food or showed signs of discomfort, he snapped or ignored me. Worse still, he had a cruel habit of tightening the bearing rein to an extreme. Though Mr. Barry did not require it, Filcher believed it made me look smarter in the streets. I could not lower my head without pain. My neck burned at the end of each day, and no matter how sore I grew, there was no one to complain to. Still, I tried to do my duty. I pulled the carriage through the crowded city streets, dodging carts and pedestrians, stopping at shops and gentlemen's clubs, waiting patiently in rain or fog while my master attended to his business. London was a blur of sound and motion. Bells ringing, horses snorting, men shouting. The air was thick with soot, the roads uneven and often slippery. But I was steady and calm, and I did my work without resistance. Until one day, when everything changed again. It began with a quiet discovery. Filcher had been stealing, not from the master's purse, but from me. He was selling my oats. I had begun to feel weaker than usual. My coat had lost its shine, and I no longer had the strength I once had for long rides. At first, I thought perhaps my injury had left lasting damage, but the truth was simpler and crueler. Filcher had been feeding me just enough to keep me standing, while selling the rest of my rations to pocket a few extra coins. It was Joe Green, yes, that Joe, from Birtwick, who uncovered the truth. He had recently moved to London and happened to recognize me tied outside a grocer's shop. "Black Beauty?" he asked in amazement, approaching with gentle eyes. "It is you," I whinnied softly, remembering the boy who once dropped a pail and sobbed in apology. He had grown taller, stronger, but his heart had not changed. He looked me over carefully and frowned. "You're too thin," he murmured, "and that reign's far too tight." That evening, he returned with a vet and confronted Mr. Barry. Filcher's theft was discovered, and he was immediately dismissed. Joe, bless him, stayed to help find me a better situation. "It's a shame," he told Mr. Barry, "for such a good horse to waste away in a city stable with no real care." Mr. Barry nodded. "He deserves more. We'll find him another home." And so I was sold again, this time not from failure, but from a chance at something better. I did not weep for the change. Life in the city had taught me that one's fate could shift in an instant, and that for a horse, survival depended on the nature of those who held the reins. As the cart pulled away from Mr. Barry's modest stable and toward my next unknown destination, I looked out over the rooftops, the smoke rising into the sky. From luxury to labor, I had followed the road wherever it took me, and I would do so again. But this time, I dared to hope for something more. Chapter 10: The Streets of London. After leaving Mr. Barry's service, I was sold to a man named Jerry Barker, a London cab driver. He was not rich, nor was he finely dressed like the gentleman I had pulled carriages for in the past. But the moment I met him, I felt something different, something rare. He had kind eyes, weathered hands, and a voice that spoke plainly but warmly. When he looked at me, it wasn't as a thing to be used, but as a fellow being. "Well," he said, walking slowly around me. "Strong legs, honest face, and good manners. Bit thin, but we'll fix that." Then, turning to the man who had brought me, he added, "I'll take him." His stable was modest, just one box stall, a small hayloft, and a tack room with worn leather harnesses neatly hung. Jerry did all the work himself, sometimes helped by his cheerful wife Polly and their two children Harry and Dolly. The first evening I arrived, Polly brought me a slice of apple and patted my neck. "Now you take care of him, Jerry," she said with a smile. "He's got kind eyes." "He'll be all right here," Jerry replied. "I treat my horses the way I'd want to be treated if I were in harness." And he meant it. In the mornings, he cleaned my stall himself and checked my hooves carefully. He gave me good food and clean water and never drove me too long without rest. He never used a bearing rein, and always adjusted the harness to comfort, not fashion. Our work together began the next day. We pulled a small two-wheeled cab through the city streets. I had seen London before, but not like this. The life of a cab horse was constant motion, dodging drays, weaving through carriages, navigating puddles, carts and crowds. Rain, fog, heat or frost, it made no difference. The people needed to get where they were going, and we were expected to take them. Some passengers were polite, tipping Jerry and patting me on the neck. Others were rude or in a hurry, demanding we move faster, even when the roads were slick with ice or jammed with traffic. But Jerry, no matter the pressure, never raised his voice or whip in anger. "I'd rather be 5 minutes late than drive a good horse into the ground," he would say calmly. Sometimes we'd carry elderly women to market, or children to the doctor, or well-dressed men to the theatre. Other times we waited hours in a rank without a fare, cold wind whipping around us while Jerry pulled his coat tighter and kept a hand on my neck to let me know I wasn't alone. "I'm sorry, old fellow," he'd say, "not our day yet, but we'll get by." There was one moment I won't forget. A cold December morning when frost lay thick over the city. Jerry and I had been working since before sunrise. He stopped at a cab stand to let me rest and stepped into a small shop for tea. When he came out, he carried a hot bun wrapped in paper, and he didn't eat it. He gave it to a little boy shivering near the curb. "Here you go, lad," he said. "You look like you've not eaten." The boy took it with wide eyes. "Thank you, sir. Go on now," Jerry said gently, "and keep warm." I watched all this, and something stirred in me. I had known cruelty. I had known neglect. But here, in a tiny act of kindness on a frozen morning, I saw the kind of man who made the world worth living in, for horse or human. Not all was easy. The roads wore down my hooves, and the damp air made my joints ache. The iron shoes slipped on cobblestones in the rain, and sometimes other cabmen shouted or cut us off in their rush for fares. Some whipped their horses mercilessly, cursing them for what was often their own carelessness. Jerry disapproved of such men. "There's no excuse for cruelty," he once said, after seeing a cabman strike his horse across the face. "If you can't treat a creature with decency, you've no business holding the reins." He became known for that view, and while some respected him, others mocked him for being soft. But he didn't care. He worked hard, took only the fares he needed, and always treated me with dignity. At the end of each day, we returned to the little stable where Polly and the children greeted us like returning heroes. I was rubbed down, fed, and spoken to as though I were family. One evening, after a long day in the sleet, Dolly came out with a scarf and wrapped it gently around my neck. "You're the best horse in London," she whispered, hugging me tightly. "Papa says so." I nuzzled her shoulder. She wasn't wrong. In the midst of a city full of noise, hardship, and hurried footsteps, I had found something rare. Not wealth, not ease, but respect. And in the eyes of a man like Jerry Barker, that was worth more than gold. Chapter 11. Ginger's Fate. My time with Jerry Barker was one of the few bright chapters in my later life. The work was hard, yes, but it was honest. I was respected, I was cared for, and I never forgot the simple warmth of being treated as a fellow living creature, not just a machine of muscle and obedience. But even a peaceful life cannot shield one from sorrow, and no sorrow struck me more deeply than the one I am about to tell. It was a grey afternoon in late autumn. The skies were low and heavy with cloud, and the wind pulled cold fingers through the narrow city streets. Jerry and I had finished our midday fare and were resting in a cab rank near a busy square. I was munching on a few mouthfuls of hay. Jerry had tucked into a feed bag when I heard a voice I hadn't heard in a long time, a familiar snort, rough and tired, followed by a low, wheezing cough. I turned my head. There, in the shaft of a shabby cab beside me, stood a chestnut mare. Her coat was thin and matted with sweat and dust. Her ribs showed plainly beneath her hide. Her legs were scarred, and her head hung low in the traces, the bit pressing cruelly against her drawn lips. It was Ginger. For a moment I couldn't believe it. Gone was the proud arch of her neck, the fire in her stride, the alertness in her eye. She looked broken, hollow. She didn't recognize me at first. I called her name gently. "Ginger." Her ears twitched. "Ginger, it's me, Black Beauty." She slowly lifted her head. Her dull eyes met mine, and I saw the flicker of recognition. A quiet breath escaped her. She blinked, as if unsure whether I was real. "Beauty," she said weakly. "You, still going?" "Yes," I said. "I'm with a good man now. His name is Jerry Barker. He's kind. We work hard, but he treats me well." She tried to nod, but faltered. Her knees trembled slightly under her. "I'm glad for you," she whispered. "You were always the lucky one." "Oh, Ginger, What happened? Her eyes closed for a moment. But after Earlshall, I was sold, again and again. Each time, a little worse. Harder work, harsher hands, less food, less care. I wanted to ask more, but I couldn't. The pain in her voice was too great. I fought, she went on, almost to herself now. I fought every step, but it didn't matter. They beat it out of me. Not just the strength, the will, it's all gone. She coughed again, deep and harsh. They don't see us, Beauty. Not really, just the outside. They pull and whip and yank until we fall, and then they sell us for less than a sack of grain. I said nothing. What could I say? Her cab driver, a harsh-faced man with a flat cap and a whip tucked into his belt, returned from the pub just then, grumbling as he climbed up into the box seat. "Back to work, girl," he muttered, yanking the reins without warning. Ginger flinched. She didn't protest. She didn't even sigh. She just moved forward slowly, painfully, into the traffic. I watched her go until she disappeared behind the blur of carts and carriages. My chest ached in a way no harness had ever caused. That night, back in the stable, I couldn't rest. I kept seeing her face, tired, battered, and so different from the Ginger I had first met at Birtwick Park. The Ginger who had once stood proud and fierce, warning me of the world's dangers. She had fought to keep her dignity, her freedom, her voice, and now she was a ghost of herself. A few days later, I heard news. Jerry came home one evening unusually quiet. He rubbed me down slowly, then paused with a deep sigh. "Polly," he said softly, "they found a mare collapsed on the rank near Ludgate Hill. Chestnut, star on her forehead. She died before they could take her to the vet." Polly said nothing. Jerry rested his hand on my withers. "Some said she just gave out, couldn't pull any more. Driver left her lying in the street like a sack of flour." I lowered my head. I didn't need to hear her name. I already knew. Ginger was gone. Gone not in a blaze of protest or rebellion, but in silence. Worked to death by a world that had never truly seen her. And yet, in that moment, I remembered her strength, her fire, her warnings. She had not gone quietly, not for years. She had resisted when others would have given up long ago. She had survived longer than the world had any right to expect. I wished I could have told her, before the end, that I remembered, that I was grateful, that I loved her. She had been my friend, my comrade, my mirror. And now she was free at last, from reins, from pain, from the cruelty of men. Farewell, Ginger. Chapter 12. A day's work. City life, especially for a cab horse, is a life of constant movement. Days begin before the sun and end well after the lamps are lit. There is no pattern, no rhythm, no predicting which roads you'll travel or which people you'll meet. All you can do is face each day, step by step, and hope the one holding your reins sees you as something more than a machine. With Jerry Barker, I always felt seen. He rose early, often before dawn, and quietly came into the stable to begin his day. No harsh shouts, no yanking of straps or banging of buckets, just the steady sound of boots on stone, the creak of the water pump, and the soft clink of grooming tools. He would rub me down, check my hooves, and speak to me like a partner. "Well, Beauty," he'd say on a foggy morning, "let's go earn our keep." Slow and steady, like always. By sunrise, we were on the move. The city would begin to stir, chimneys puffing smoke, shutters being opened, men pushing barrows of vegetables to market. Horses and carts filled the streets like a river of hooves and wheels. Steam and soot hung in the air, and the sharp cry of newspaper boys echoed from alley to alley. That particular day began like many others. We drove to a stand near the railway station, waiting for incoming trains. People spilled out with trunks and bags, looking for a quick cab to take them away. Our first fare was a middle-aged woman and her young son, returning from visiting relatives. They were polite, and the boys stroked my muzzle shyly before climbing in. "Such a handsome horse," the woman said, "and so calm." Jerry tipped his hat. "He's a good one, ma'am. Knows his job better than most men I've met." We took them across town, dropping them at a brick house with ivy around the door. The woman gave Jerry an extra coin. "For the horse," she said. "Buy him something sweet." Jerry smiled. "Thank you kindly. He'll have a carrot tonight, no mistake." Not all passengers were so gracious. An hour later, we picked up a young gentleman in a top hat. Clearly in a hurry, he snapped the carriage door shut and barked, "Quickly, I'm late already." Jerry began at a steady trot, but the man leaned out and shouted, "Faster, I said I'm late." "It's a steep grade here, sir," Jerry replied calmly, "and the stones are wet. I won't risk the horse for a few minutes' gain." The man muttered something rude, and banged his cane against the side of the carriage. But Jerry didn't flinch, and neither did I. When we arrived, the man tossed a coin without a word and stormed off. Jerry shook his head. Hurry, 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 and never a thought for the legs that carry them. We continued through the afternoon. A quiet scholar with a stack of books, a mother with a sick child, a well-dressed couple arguing in tight whispers, each fare different, each person a story, some kind, some indifferent, some thoughtless, but all dependent on us, though few understood it. By evening, the sky turned a dull yellow, and the city began to quiet. The lamps were lit, casting flickering halos on the mist. We stopped at the Strand to pick up a final fare, a frail elderly man in a long coat, his hands shaking as he climbed in. "To the hospital," he said, his voice thin. "Slowly, please. I'm not in a rush, but I can't take the jostling." "Of course, sir," Jerry said gently. "You just sit back. We'll go easy." That final ride was slow and smooth. I placed my hooves carefully, avoiding potholes and uneven paving stones. The man coughed softly now and then, but mostly he sat in silence, eyes glazed with thought. When we arrived, he stepped down, pressed a silver coin into Jerry's hand, and looked up at me. "You have a fine horse, cabman," he said. "He moves like he understands." "He does, sir," Jerry said. "More than most." We returned home late. The air was colder now, the wind sharper. Jerry rubbed me down by lantern light, whistling softly, though I could see he was tired. Polly came to the stable door with a mug of tea and a biscuit. "Hard day?" she asked. "Harder for Beauty than for me," he replied, giving me a pat. But he never complains. That night, as I lay in my stall, the events of the day turned over in my mind. I had carried the old and the young, the kind and the cruel. I had trotted through cold mist and noisy streets, through praise and indifference, and yet I felt a deep peace. It wasn't just that I had done my job, it was that I had done it with purpose and with dignity. I had a man who saw me, who spoke to me with respect, and in a world of iron and stone, where so many turned blind eyes to pain, that was no small thing. That was everything. Chapter 13. Illness and Change. Winter came early that year. The London sky hung heavy with low clouds, and the streets were slick with frozen mud and melting snow. Ice glistened on the cobblestones like shards of glass, and the cold seeped into every stable and alleyway, coiling around the bones of horses and men alike. For a cab horse like me, this was the hardest season of all. The city never slept, even in the worst weather. People still needed to go to hospitals, stations, shops, and offices. The poor still queued for bread, and the rich still called for cabs to dinner parties, bundled in furs while we stood waiting in the icy street, breath steaming into the grey air. But even as I braced against the cold, I could feel that something else was changing, something deeper, more serious. Jerry Barker was not well. It began with a cough, a rough one that he tried to hide behind his scarf. At first I thought little of it. Everyone coughed in the city, what with the fog and smoke. But this was different. It didn't go away. Day after day it grew harsher, deeper, and more exhausting. Polly begged him to see a doctor, but Jerry waved her off. "I've worked through worse," he'd say, forcing a smile. "A bit of rest when things ease up, that's all I need." But things never eased. The cold only deepened, and work kept calling. Jerry kept to his routine with quiet determination. He still rose early, still rubbed me down with his own hands, still wrapped me in extra blankets when we returned from a long day, but I could feel the weight of his steps, hear the strain in his breathing, see how slowly he moved when he thought no one was looking. One night, after an especially long day, we arrived home well after dark. Jerry stumbled slightly as he climbed down from the cab. "Just tired," he said to Polly, brushing away her worried hands. But in the middle of unharnessing me, he stopped, his face pale, his hands trembling. He leaned against the stable wall. "Jerry," Polly cried, rushing to his side. He didn't collapse, not quite, but she had to help him into the house. Harry, now a bit older, finished rubbing me down, his small hands clumsy but careful. "Don't worry, Beauty," he said. "Papa just needs rest." But I knew better. The doctor came the next morning and stayed a long time. When he left, Polly sat in silence for what seemed like hours, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Then she came out to the stable and leaned her forehead against my neck. "It's his lungs," she whispered. "All that cold, all that damp. He's not to go out again, not for weeks, maybe longer." So we stopped working. At first, I was surprised by the stillness. No early morning rush, no clatter of harness buckles, no voice calling, "Steady now, Beauty." Days passed in silence. Jerry stayed indoors, coughing behind closed windows. I could hear him sometimes, low, painful coughs that shook the walls. It was the worst sound I had ever heard. The children tried to keep cheerful. Polly worked endlessly, cleaning, cooking, mending clothes, caring for Jerry, but I could see the worry in her eyes, in the tightness of her lips, in the way she stood still in the doorway just a little too long before turning away. With no income from the cab, money grew scarce. Polly began selling what she could. Old coats, a spare set of dishes, some of Harry's toys. She refused to sell me. I heard her say it more than once. He's worth more than we could ask for, and he's done more for this family than most men would. No, we keep him. But things could not go on that way forever. One morning, Jerry, now a little stronger, but pale and thin, called the family together at the breakfast table. I watched from the stable window as they sat close, shoulders touching. "I can't work the cab anymore," he said softly. "Not until I'm fully well. And we can't afford to keep it idle, so I've made a decision." Polly looked away. The children were silent. "We're going to sell the cab," Jerry said, "and Beauty." Dolly burst into tears. Harry tried to stay brave, but his chin trembled. "No," Polly said at last, her voice tight. "Jerry, don't." He took her hand. "It's not because we want to. It's because we must. We'll find a good home for him. I'll see to it myself. No cruelty, no neglect. He deserves the best we can give him." And so the plan was made. The next few days were hard. People came to look at me, some rough, some careless, some too poor to afford proper feed or shelter. Jerry turned them all away. He wouldn't sell me to just anyone. And then came Mr. Thorogood. He was a retired country gentleman, helping his son run a small parcel business just outside London. When he saw me, he approached slowly, speaking to me as one speaks to an old friend. "Well now," he said gently. "What a noble fellow. Quiet eyes, worn, yes, but honest." Jerry told him my full history, everything, from my days in the meadow to life in the city. Mr. Thorogood nodded thoughtfully. "We need a steady horse for light delivery work. My son's firm only does short hauls, no heavy loads, just letters and boxes, and we treat our horses right." "Then you're the one," Jerry said, shaking his hand. "Only one thing I ask. You let me visit him once in a while." "Of course," said Mr. Thorogood. "He'll be part of the family." That night, Jerry came to me for a final grooming. He moved slowly, stopping often to rest. When he finished, he pressed his forehead gently to mine. "Goodbye, old friend," he said. "You carried me through years of honest work. You fed my children. You never let me down, and I'll never forget you." The next morning, I was led out of the yard for the last time. I looked back once. Polly stood in the doorway, wiping her eyes. Harry raised a hand. Dolly whispered something I couldn't hear. I didn't want to leave, but I walked on. Because sometimes, love means knowing when to let go. Chapter 14. The Lowest Point. I had lived many lives by now. Pasture colt, gentleman's carriage horse, cab horse and friend. Through each season of my life, through every fall and rising again, I had held on to the hope that goodness would find me, that kindness would follow me as it once had. But life does not always offer such mercy, and for a time I was lost in a world without it. After Jerry Barker sold me, I went briefly to Mr. Thorogood and his son, who did indeed treat me kindly. Their parcel business was small but respectable. I pulled light loads, rested well, and was fed properly. I dared to hope that perhaps, even in old age, a horse could find peace. But good homes are fragile things. After a few short months, the younger Thorogood moved abroad for an opportunity, and the business was sold. I was deemed too old for new operations and passed on once again, this time to a man who promised good stabling and light work. He lied. My new master was a jobber, someone who bought and sold horses quickly for profit. There was no interest in my history, my training, or my temperament. I was a means to an end, a body to haul, hooves to pound the pavement, and bones to wear down to nothing. I was placed in a filthy stable, dark and damp, with broken boards and a roof that dripped even in mild rain. The straw was thin, the food poorer still, mouldy hay, and barely enough oats to keep a dog alive. There was no grooming, no kind words, no thought, only the orders to move, and the punishments if I hesitated. Each morning, I was yoked to a heavy cart too heavy for a horse of my age and strength. The loads were badly balanced, the harness old and rubbed raw against my skin. We hauled crates, barrels, coal, furniture, anything and everything, and always in a hurry. The man who drove me cared for nothing but speed and coin. He cursed constantly, lashed my sides with a short whip, and pulled the bit cruelly if I faltered. He ignored my limping gait, my sore shoulders, my dull coat. He did not notice the wear in my eyes. Or perhaps he did, and simply didn't care. It was the first time in my life that I truly felt despair. There were days I couldn't stand straight when we returned to the stable. My legs buckled when I stepped from the shafts. My hooves were chipped, my knees swollen, and my breath short from the strain. Nights were no comfort. I lay in the sour straw, shivering from cold and exhaustion, dreaming of green pastures and soft hands that would never return. And no one came. No Jerry, no Joe, no Farmer Gray, no gentle children bringing apples in their little palms. Only silence, or worse, shouting. Other horses came and went in the same stable. Most were as broken as I was. Some arrived already lame. Others worked for a week then disappeared, sold off again, or worse. None spoke much. There was nothing left to say. One cold morning, after a sleepless night and barely a handful of food, I was taken out again, hitched to a cart stacked with rough lumber. The wheels were badly aligned and the axles squeaked horribly. The harness dug into an old sore on my chest. Halfway down a long hill, my legs gave out. I don't remember falling. I remember the crack of my knees hitting the stones. I remember the bite of the bit pulling against my mouth as I collapsed. I remember the cart lurching forward, wood tumbling around me, and then nothing. I came to lying in the street, unable to rise, my vision blurred, my body screamed with pain. People were shouting. A woman gasped. Someone said, "That horse is done for." Another said, "Why don't they just put him down?" But someone else, someone I couldn't see, knelt beside me. "This horse is not dead," a calm voice said. "Look at him. He's exhausted, overworked and underfed, but he still breathes." A warm hand touched my face, not rough, not hurried. "We'll take him," the voice said. "We can give him rest. If he doesn't recover, we'll see he meets a kinder end than this." And that was how my lowest point became unbelievably not my end. I was lifted carefully into a cart, taken to a quiet stable on the city's edge. There I lay for days, too weak to move, but I was not beaten. I was not shouted at. I was fed slowly, gently. My wounds were cleaned, my body warmed, and I began, faintly, to hope. But in those first days, I did not think of the future. I thought of Ginger, of Merrylegs, of Joe, of the meadow where I had once played under a golden sky. And I thought, if this is the end, let it be in peace. Let it be with dignity. But fate, as it had done so many times before, had other plans. Chapter 15. A New Chance. For many days after my collapse in the street, I drifted in and out of sleep, unsure if I was living or dreaming. Pain had become so familiar that I no longer noticed it, and time passed like mist, soft, shapeless and slow. But little by little, as the days grew warmer and the sting in my bones faded, I realized something had changed. I was not afraid. The stable I now rested in was small but clean. The straw beneath me was fresh and dry. Sunlight filtered in through a high window, warming my back. A bird sometimes nested just outside, and I would hear it sing in the morning. The scent of lavender and warm oats replaced the sourness of mold and filth. I could breathe again deeply. And each day, a man came. He was older, with silver in his beard and gentle, work-worn hands. His name, I soon learned, was Mr. Thorogood, and I had met him once before, briefly, when he had first purchased me from Jerry Barker. He had been the one to speak for me when I had fallen, and now he was the one helping me live again. "There we go, old boy," he would say softly as he brushed my coat. "Not so fast now. You've earned your rest." He never rushed, never struck, never demanded anything more than I could give. At his side was his son, Willie Thorogood, a bright young man who ran a small, honest delivery business that served farms and merchants on the edge of the city. Willie had a quick smile and a cheerful manner, and though he didn't yet know how to read a horse the way his father did, he was eager to learn. "I've never seen a horse with eyes like that," Willie said one afternoon, kneeling beside me. "There's something in him, something old, but not broken." I felt something stir in me at those words. It was not pride, not exactly, but it was something close to recognition, like hearing your name after being lost in silence. They did not put me to work right away. For many weeks I simply rested, fed slowly on good oats and hay, my legs rubbed with liniment and bandaged where needed. They gave me space, and they gave me time. The winter ice was gone now, replaced by soft spring air and the smell of damp earth waking up after sleep. I began to feel strength return to my body. My coat slowly regained its sheen. My joints ached less. I could stand for longer, stretch more freely, and one morning, I found myself trotting a few paces in the paddock without pain. Willie saw it and ran to the fence, clapping softly. He's got life in him yet. His father smiled. He does. The question is, will he let himself begin again? That question echoed inside me. To begin again. Was such a thing possible? After so much loss, after the hard hand of cruelty and the long march of suffering, could a horse trust again? Could he belong again? I didn't know, but the Thorogoods believed in me, not with loud promises or speeches, but with quiet daily care. With every scoop of grain, every gentle brushing, every patient word, they gave me something I hadn't known I still needed. Permission to hope. Eventually, I was harnessed again, not to a heavy cart or a rattling cab, but to a small, well-balanced wagon used for carrying parcels to and from the countryside. The shafts were clean and padded, the reins were soft, the bit fit comfortably. Everything had been measured and prepared with care. The first time I pulled the wagon, Willie walked beside me. "You're not a servant here," he said. "You're a partner." We didn't go far that day, just a short circuit through the orchard and back. I felt awkward at first, uncertain if the pain would return, but it didn't. My stride was steady, my breathing strong. When we finished, Willie rubbed my neck and laughed. Not bad for an old gentleman. And I realized for the first time in many years, I had not been driven, I had been guided. In the weeks that followed, my work increased, but never beyond my strength. I carried letters, light boxes, small farm supplies. Willie often whistled as we traveled, greeting people with cheer. They would look at me and say things like, "What a fine old horse. He walks like he's proud of every step, steady as they come." And I was proud, not because I was the strongest or the fastest, but because I had survived and now I was trusted. In quiet moments I thought of the past, of Ginger, of Merrylegs, of John Manley, of Jerry Barker. They were gone, scattered across time and memory, but they had given me something to carry forward, a sense of rightness, a belief that even the darkest path can lead to light. And now, under a soft spring sky, with fresh grass under my hooves and kindness in every gesture around me, I knew this was my new chance. And this time, I would not waste it. Chapter 15. A new chance. For many days after my collapse in the street, I drifted in and out of sleep, unsure if I was living or dreaming. Pain had become so familiar that I no longer noticed it, and time passed like mist, soft, shapeless and slow. But little by little, as the days grew warmer and the sting in my bones faded, I realized something had changed. I was not afraid. The stable I now rested in was small but clean. The straw beneath me was fresh and dry. Sunlight filtered in through a high window, warming my back. A bird sometimes nested just outside, and I would hear it sing in the morning. The scent of lavender and warm oats replaced the sourness of mold and filth. I could breathe again deeply. And each day, a man came. He was older, with silver in his beard and gentle, work-worn hands. His name, I soon learned, was Mr. Thorogood, and I had met him once before, briefly, when he had first purchased me from Jerry Barker. He had been the one to speak for me when I had fallen, and now he was the one helping me live again. "There we go, old boy," he would say softly as he brushed my coat. "Not so fast now, you've earned your rest." He never rushed, never struck, never demanded anything more than I could give. At his side was his son, Willie Thorogood, a bright young man who ran a small, honest delivery business that served farms and merchants on the edge of the city. Willie had a quick smile and a cheerful manner, and though he didn't yet know how to read a horse the way his father did, he was eager to learn. "I've never seen a horse with eyes like that," Willie said one afternoon, kneeling beside me. "There's something in him, something old, but not broken." I felt something stir in me at those words. It was not pride, not exactly, but it was something close to recognition, like hearing your name after being lost in silence. They did not put me to work right away. For many weeks, I simply rested, fed slowly on good oats and hay, my legs rubbed with liniment and bandaged where needed. They gave me space, and they gave me time. The winter ice was gone now, replaced by soft spring air and the smell of damp earth waking up after sleep. I began to feel strength return to my body. My coat slowly regained its sheen. My joints ached less. I could stand for longer, stretch more freely, and one morning, I found myself trotting a few paces in the paddock without pain. Willie saw it and ran to the fence, clapping softly. "He's got life in him yet." His father smiled. "He does. The question is, will he let himself begin again?" That question echoed inside me. To begin again. Was such a thing possible? After so much loss, After the hard hand of cruelty and the long march of suffering, could a horse trust again? Could he belong again? I didn't know, but the Thoroughgoods believed in me. Not with loud promises or speeches, but with quiet, daily care. With every scoop of grain, every gentle brushing, every patient word, they gave me something I hadn't known I still needed. Permission to hope. Eventually I was harnessed again, not to a heavy cart or a rattling cab, but to a small, well-balanced wagon used for carrying parcels to and from the countryside. The shafts were clean and padded, the reins were soft, the bit fit comfortably. Everything had been measured and prepared with care. The first time I pulled the wagon, Willie walked beside me. "You're not a servant here," he said. "You're a partner." We didn't go far that day. Just a short circuit through the orchard and back. I felt awkward at first, uncertain if the pain would return, but it didn't. My stride was steady, my breathing strong. When we finished, Willie rubbed my neck and laughed. Not bad for an old gentleman, and I realized for the first time in many years, I had not been driven, I had been guided. In the weeks that followed, my work increased, but never beyond my strength. I carried letters, light boxes, small farm supplies. Willie often whistled as we traveled, greeting people with cheer. They would look at me and say things like, "What a fine old horse. He walks like he's proud of every step." Steady as they come. And I was proud, not because I was the strongest or the fastest, but because I had survived, and now I was trusted. In quiet moments, I thought of the past, of Ginger, of Merrylegs, of John Manley, of Jerry Barker. They were gone, scattered across time and memory, but they had given me something to carry forward, a sense of rightness, a belief that even the darkest path can lead to light. And now, under a soft spring sky, with fresh grass under my hooves and kindness in every gesture around me, I knew this was my new chance, and this time I would not waste it. Chapter 16. Return to the country. It was still early spring when the final change in my life quietly began. By then, my strength had returned, my coat had recovered its sheen, my step was steady, and my heart, though weathered, was no longer heavy with fear. I was no longer afraid of whips or cold iron bits. I was no longer waiting for the next blow or the next harsh hand. I had learned to breathe again. One morning, Willie Thorogood led me out of the stable and stroked my nose with his usual cheerful grin. "You're a gentleman now, Beauty," he said, "but I think it's time you had a home in the country again. No more city smoke, no more cobbled streets." My ears twitched. Could it be? Was I truly going back to the country? "We found a place for you," Mr. Thorogood said as he joined his son. "An old friend of mine, a retired vicar and his wife. A quiet life, light work, a paddock of your own. They need a gentle horse for the grandchildren to ride and for fetching the post twice a week." He paused as if measuring his words. "You've earned it." I didn't understand everything they said, but I understood the tone. Something good was coming, something peaceful. The journey took us out of London and into the green arms of the countryside. As the road stretched on, the air grew sweeter, the trees taller, and the noises quieter. Gone were the smoke and the constant clatter of hooves. In their place came birdsong and the soft rustling of leaves. We arrived just before sunset. The cottage stood at the edge of a quiet village, with ivy curling up its whitewashed walls and smoke rising from a stone chimney. A paddock stretched behind it, green and dotted with daisies, and a tidy little stable stood near the orchard. The vicar and his wife came out to greet us. They were elderly, with soft eyes and gentle voices. The vicar patted my flank and said, "He's a beautiful fellow, just what we hoped for. He has kind eyes," his wife added, "and such a calm spirit." I felt calm, deeply, quietly calm. They led me to the stable and let me settle in. The straw was deep and clean. A trough of cool water waited. Oats were brought, along with a slice of apple from the lady's own hand. I felt their care in every detail, not the flashy, polished care of a wealthy estate, but the quiet attentiveness that comes from love. Over the next few days, I learned the rhythm of this new life. It was simple, honest, and gentle. In the mornings, I was let out into the paddock where I could roll, stretch, and graze to my heart's content. The birds sang in the hedges, and the sun warmed my back. Sometimes the vicar's grandchildren came to visit. They would ride me bareback, laughing and clinging to my mane, their small hands gentle on my sides. I loved them, these little ones, who knew nothing of reins, pull tight, or cruel drivers. They rode for joy, not control. Twice a week, I pulled a small cart into the village to collect the post or deliver parcels for the vicar. The cart was light and well balanced, and the roads were smooth. People would stop and smile as we passed. "There goes the vicar's horse," they'd say, "still walking like a lord. That one, what a steady fellow." I did walk proudly, not with the stiff-bearing rein of Earlshire, but with the quiet dignity of a horse who had known suffering and outlived it. And as I moved through the village lanes, past stone walls and fields of young wheat, I thought often of the meadow of my youth, the place where I had first galloped with my mother and heard her say, "Be gentle and good, and all will be well." I had tried, through the storms, the pain, the cruelty and kindness alike. I had tried to be gentle, to endure, to remember who I was. And now, in this quiet place with the birds and the children and the old man who hummed hymns while cleaning the harness, I felt that I had finally come full circle. One evening, as I stood at the fence watching the sky turn gold and violet, the vicar walked up beside me. "You've seen a hard road," he said quietly, laying a hand on my neck, "but you're home now." And I believed him. Chapter 17. Recognition and Reunion. Summer was in full bloom. The days were long and warm, and the air carried the scent of honeysuckle and ripening fruit. Insects buzzed lazily through the hedgerows, and the village seemed to hum with quiet contentment. For the first time in many years, my life passed not in strain or survival, but in simple, peaceful routine. I grazed in the paddock in the mornings, worked lightly pulling the vicar's cart in the afternoons, and rested in the stable each night, with clean straw beneath me and the soft sounds of owls hooting in the trees. It was an honest life, gentle and without fear. But even in peace, memory lingers. Sometimes I thought of Ginger, of her bright eyes and sharp words, and how the world had worn her down. Sometimes I thought of Merrylegs and wondered if he still nuzzled laughing children somewhere. And sometimes, most often, I thought of Birtwick Park and of the boy who once spilled my pail and wept for his mistake. His name was Joe Green. One warm afternoon, as I stood in the shade near the orchard, I heard a familiar voice at the garden gate. It was Mr. Thorogood, the elder, speaking with the vicar. I recognized his calm tone and kindly way of choosing words. "I believe you'll be pleased, Reverend," he said. "That horse has recovered splendidly, and I'd like to show him to my son's apprentice. He's a good young fellow, and he used to know this horse well, a groom once when the horse was at Birtwick Park." My ears twitched. Birtwick. A moment later, I heard the gate creak open and footsteps approaching. Two men came into view, Mr. Thorogood and a much younger man walking beside him. The younger man had broad shoulders, sun-darkened skin, and a clean, honest face. His hands were work-roughened, but he carried himself with quiet humility. And then he stopped short. He stared at me, his eyes wide, his breath caught. "Is that?" he whispered. Mr. Thorogood smiled. "Yes, this is him, do you remember?" The young man stepped slowly toward me, blinking as though afraid to believe. "Black Beauty?" he said softly. At the sound of his voice, something within me stirred. I took a step forward, then another. I lowered my head to his chest and breathed him in. Faint traces of hay, soap and memory. And then I knew. It was Joe. Joe Green. He laid both hands on my face and pressed his forehead to mine. "It is you," he said, barely above a whisper. "I'd know you anywhere." His voice trembled. He stroked my neck as he used to when he was just a boy and I a young carriage horse. "I never forgot you," he said. "Not for a day. After you left Birtwick, I asked about you everywhere I worked. I always wondered where you ended up and if you were safe." I breathed out slowly and closed my eyes, standing still as a statue. The past, long buried, flooded back in a moment. The scent of Birtwick's clover fields, the steady hand of John Manley, and the earnest boy who once wept for a mistake and grew stronger because of it. And now, here he was, grown, capable, and kind. Mr. Thorogood watched us with a smile. "You two clearly remember each other. Perhaps this is fate." Joe nodded. "More than fate, it's a blessing." From that day forward, Joe came often. Though I remained in the vicar's care, Joe helped tend to me and took me out for the occasional ride or drive. His hands were sure, and his voice always held a note of affection when he spoke to me. "You're still the best horse I've ever known," he'd say, brushing my coat until it gleamed. "And the bravest. To be remembered is a powerful thing. To be known, to be truly seen after years of being passed from hand to hand is no small gift." In Joe's eyes, I was not just a horse. I was Black Beauty, with a name, a story, and a soul. And in that recognition, I found something I had almost forgotten I still had, a sense of home. Chapter 18. Peace at last. The seasons turned slowly, and with them, My life settled into its final and most peaceful chapter. There was no drama now, no city noise or flashing whips, no cruel bits or heavy carts. My days passed in sunlight and soft earth, in the laughter of children and the gentle rhythm of light work. I was no longer young, but I was not afraid of growing old. Age, when accompanied by kindness, is not something to dread. At the vicar's cottage, I had everything a horse could want: food enough, shelter from the wind, and most of all, respect. I was no longer just a body to be harnessed, but a creature whose life was known and valued. That, I believe, is the greatest gift one can receive. In the mornings, I grazed contentedly in the paddock while the mist rose from the fields. Birds flitted among the hedges, and the world moved slowly, softly. In the afternoons, I sometimes carried one of the vicar's grandchildren on my back, tiny legs clinging to my sides, giggles filling the air. They loved to braid daisies into my mane and whisper secrets into my ears. "You're the best horse in the whole world," one of them said once, wrapping her arms around my neck. I didn't need the words, but I felt them deeply. Sometimes, Mr. Thorogood or his son would visit, and Joe Green came too, as often as he could. He had his own stable now, small but decent, and he always said, half joking, "When you're done being a gentleman's horse, old friend, come live your last days with me." But I was happy here. I needed no further change. I often stood beneath the old chestnut tree near the orchard, letting the breeze pass through my mane, and I would remember not just the bad, though there had been much of that, but all of it, the whole of my life. For what is a life, if not a tapestry of pain and joy, sorrow and comfort, darkness and light? I remembered my mother's voice in the meadow: "Be gentle and good, and all will be well." I remembered Farmer Gray and John Manley. I remembered Ginger, fierce and wounded, and Merrylegs, full of cheer. I remembered the long, cold nights in London and the warm barn in Birtwick where I had earned my name. Most of all, I remembered the hands that had treated me not as property, but as a companion. The humans who saw not just a horse, but me. Not every horse is so lucky. I do not know how many more years I had. A horse does not count days, but I did not fear what lay ahead. I had lived through much, and I had learned one simple truth: kindness matters. It is not loud, it is not grand, but it changes everything. It saves lives. It saved mine. As the sun dipped below the trees one evening, casting the fields in golden light, I stood still and watched the world glow. A child's laughter rang from the garden, a bird sang from the apple tree, and somewhere far away in memory, I heard the gentle sound of hooves in soft grass and the wind through the tall meadow where I was born. I had come full circle, and now, at last, I was at peace. Thanks for spending this quiet time with me here at Sweet Dreams Storytelling. I hope you're feeling relaxed, peaceful, and ready for a restful sleep. As we say goodnight, let the calm background music guide you gently into dreamland. Before you go, don't forget to like the video and subscribe, and until next time, rest well.